Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Would you like to know a secret? By Bo Bandy. Come over here, please. I'm not gonna hurt you, I promise. I'm just looking to make new friends. I think you'd make a fine addition to my past group of pals. I've been in this house a long time. I was here long before you were born. Over the years, I've made many other friends here, but I can tell you are special. I know that from the way you smile. Would you like to know a big secret? You are curious, aren't you? Yes, good. Come on, let's go. Little Sherry followed the floating form down into the basement of her parents' colonial-era plantation home as they unloaded boxes and furniture. She wasn't afraid at all. She felt safe because the talking shadow seemed very friendly. It even smiled at her. She was very curious to find out what the big secret was. Only the dark cloud leading the way knew. Sherry's mother wasn't immediately worried. She just assumed her 4-year-old daughter was curious and wandering around their new house. When she didn't respond right away, she called out to her a second time. After that, each subsequent attempt to summon her was met with equal failure. Concern escalated to worry. Worry transitioned to white-knuckle fear. In an elevated level of frenzy, she enlisted her husband to help track her down. The two of them split up to cover more ground, but their search proved fruitless. After crisscrossing every room of the property at least twice, they expanded their search to include the exterior grounds and nearby woods. Both parents were hoarse from yelling and screaming her name. Mrs. Baylock was just about to call the police when little Sherry came outside to find out what all the commotion was about. She had no idea her parents were hysterical because they couldn't find her. "Oh my gosh, Sherry! Where were you? Your dad and I have been looking for you everywhere. We've been calling you. We were terrified you were lost. Didn't you hear us shouting your name?" Sherry was genuinely bewildered. She hadn't heard them at all. They seemed very mad at her. It made her start to cry because she didn't want them angry. "Mommy, I was with Maurice in the basement." Mrs. Baylock was doubly perplexed. Who was Maurice, and where in the basement? Both your father and I went down there looking for you. I didn't see you, Sherry, neither did your father. We were frightened. Maurice is my new friend, Mama. He's a dark cloud man. He showed me a hidden doorway down there that leads into a secret room. I was talking to him in the dark. I'm sorry I didn't hear you, and Daddy called me. Don't be scared. I was just with him." Both parents looked at each other in wide-eyed fear, which completely eclipsed their previous panic. If some homeless pervert had led her down into the basement, that was too terrifying to even consider. Mrs. Baylock snatched up her daughter and held her tightly, while making a discreet examination of her clothing. There were no obvious signs of foul play, but that wasn't exactly proof she was all right. "Your daddy needs to talk to Maurice. Can you show us where he is right now?" She tried to ask in the most casual way possible, while hiding her rising level of apprehension. "Maurice lives in our basement, but he told me he doesn't like talking to grown-ups. He says they are too judgmental, but I don't know what that means. I think he'll hide if you call him, Mommy." Mr. Blaylock wielded a large crescent wrench and walked down to the basement. Behind him, his wife and daughter followed. They needed her to show where the secret door was. if they really had a vagrant man squatting in their house, he would be anxious to get out once he witnessed the heavy weapon in Charles's hand. Sherry pointed to an ordinary-looking place on the wall. When prodded further, she explained how to activate the secret door. When it flew open, both adults could hardly believe it. Neither a secret door nor a hidden room had been disclosed on the real estate tour or the deed. Both of them secretly considered that Sherry might have accidentally discovered the hidden room and made up an imaginary playmate, but that seemed far-fetched. A close examination of the hidden room failed to reveal any intruders. They had their daughter back, and she seemed unharmed. Accepting the imaginary friend explanation was the easiest way to swallow, so they just both went with it. There were a lot of boxes to unpack and furniture to put in place. Maurice was soon forgotten. Neither of them had time to ponder what the odds were of a 4-year-old to discover a hidden room by herself. The very first time she was down in the basement, it was just a little too weird to dwell on. The thing is, Sherry volunteered a number of other things about their colonial home which she wouldn't have any insight into. She offered them interesting and historically accurate details, which she wasn't privy to. It baffled and fascinated them, but they deliberately avoided inquiring how she came to know these things. They were secretly afraid to know. It was a subtle form of parental denial. "Maurice told me." Finally hearing those words as an explanation made ice run through her veins. Janet felt it difficult to breathe. They had deliberately avoided asking her any more about her imaginary friend, in hopes that she would forget him. At her tender age of development, she could barely even pronounce the uncommon name. It seemed reasonable she'd eventually forget. Despite the willful reasoning, Maurice kept popping back up as Sherry's mysterious and unofficial source of knowledge about their 200-year-old plantation estate. "What's a slave, Mommy?" Janet was so startled by the abrupt, unusual question that she dropped the saucer under her coffee cup. It shattered on the floor with an ugly bang. Despite the loss of the matching dish, she was grateful for the brief reprieve from answering the uncomfortable question. "Where did you hear that word?" she managed to choke out. Even before the words formed in her daughter's mouth, she knew what they were going to be. "Maurice told us he used to be a slave when he lived here in the house a long time ago. I just don't know what that means. He said you would explain it to me." It was the first time her daughter's friend had directly invoked her. Holding back the denial was getting increasingly difficult. They were all just pretending to pretend. Now this Maurice was prodding Sherry to ask questions. He was pushing for his supernatural existence to finally be acknowledged. She didn't know what to do next, or how detailed to get in her answer. Was he watching them? Would he be offended if she simplified her answer to not trouble her daughter's 4-year-old mind? Her husband was still in deep denial, but she decided it was time to face the literal apparition in the room. She went downstairs during Sherry's nap and opened the hidden door. It was the first time she'd been back inside the secret room since finding out about it. Everything about her intentions gave her the willies, but Janet needed to confront their unofficial occupant. It was bound to be a terrifying experience, but she hoped he was both benevolent and well-intentioned. The thought of being alone with a so-called dark cloud sent shivers up her spine. "Maurice, I know you are here. I would very much like to speak with you." Despite the whispering, the sound echoed in the windowless room. She didn't know what to expect from the request. She'd never been a believer in the supernatural before, but there wasn't any doubt in her mind anymore. "I'd like to clear the air and ask you a few questions." A deep, resonant, unseen voice addressed her. "Good evening, madam. I am Maurice Littlefield. I was born in 1741, in what is now known as Sierra Leone. When I was 15 years old, I was kidnapped and brought to this country by a British slave ship. The previous owner of the plantation purchased me to serve his family. I did so faithfully until my passing in 1809. For reasons that are unknown to me, I've been a guest here ever since. As the house servant, these were my personal quarters. I'm not bound by physical limitations of the earth any longer, but out of habit, I mostly dwell within these 4 hidden walls." Janet didn't know what to say. It was as incredible as it was horrific to hear his painful history delivered in such stoic terms was a testament to his moral fiber and humility. More than 200 years had passed since his death, but the devastation still lingered. Everything she wanted to offer in apology felt woefully inadequate and complacent. In the end, she just said, "I'm very sorry for everything that happened to you." A great silence fell upon the room. She wondered if he was still there. "You've shown yourself to my daughter. May I see you?" "Madam, I mean no disrespect for speaking with your lovely daughter when you moved in. She's precious, and a great blessing to you and your husband. I never had any children of my own, but I was entrusted with caring for the young boys and girls of this house by the master of the plantation. I have a great love for children, and am saddened that I never had the chance to become a father myself. Playing hide-and-seek, Red Rover, or a few other childhood games with little Sherry is about the only joy I have left anymore. I beg your forgiveness. I meant no harm." Janet's heart melted from Maurice's bittersweet explanation of loneliness. "I understand your need to interface with people in general, but why do you hide yourself from myself and my husband? Couldn't we also be a source of comfort?" "Madam, only young children can see me in my present form and not be afraid, because their minds are not so set in their ways. Seeing me as I am would gravely frighten you, because you see the world through the eyes of an adult. Sherry and the little ones who lived here, the past were not hardened by the adult expectation of normal. That's why I felt so much joy when your precious family moved in. There hasn't been any children in here in many years to see me without judgment." "Mr. Littlefield, I understand now. I can't say how my husband would react if he knew the truth, but I know you have the purest of intentions. I don't mind you being my daughter's special friend. May she bring you as much joy as humanly possible until she reaches the age where she can no longer handle the realities of your unique friendship. After that, there lies the possibility of more children from us, and grandchildren a few more years down the road. May all of the future children in this house bring you peace and laughter. Bless you, Maurice Littlefield. So quoth this raven. I asked Bo about this one for the Dr. Creepin special, which is upcoming probably in the middle of, for an extra who lost their partner, but it didn't turn out that way. So I am sharing it here with you guys. I hope you enjoy. And so, on. The Rotten House by Dry Wit, Dry Wine. Bridget Richards? The voice on the other end of the line sounded somber and familiar. Yes, this is she. This is Helen Nichols, your old neighbor. I have some bad news, dear. Your mother has passed. I had been dreading this phone call for the last 20 years, since the night my mother kicked me out and told me never to come back. It was my 16th birthday. Mom was working the morning shift at the diner, so I had the house to myself. I decided that I would surprise her and spend the day cleaning the hallway that leads to my bedroom. I worked for hours, threw out bags of disposable coffee cups, old newspapers no one ever read, and clothes that didn't fit anymore. I scrubbed the floor and cleaned the walls. I was so proud of what I was able to accomplish. I was so sure she would walk in, dazzled by all the work I had done, and realize if we did it together, we could clean up the rest of the house. When she arrived home, it felt like the world around me exploded. Instead of praises for all the hard work, she spewed vile hate at me while she threw my belongings on the front lawn. The last words I ever spoke to my mother were, "I hate you. You will never see me again," right before she shut the front door, slamming the lock in place. At the time, I had no idea how true those words would end up being. I don't know what drove me to come back here after the funeral. The house was nothing but rot and mildew. It shouldn't have been able to support itself, let alone life. And yet it did. My mother used to live here, tucked away in a little corner with all her prized possessions. The neighbors were the unfortunate ones to find her. They popped by last Monday after noticing she hadn't been to their thrift store in a week. Something that she hadn't missed in 15 years, they said. Her body was found in one of the livable spaces left in the old house. Her 30-year-old lazy boy chair that reeked of piss and shit and stained with much worse was barely visible underneath the mountain of crumbling boxes they found her beneath. Her disease literally smothering her until she rotted alongside it. One would have thought that the smell would have alerted them that something was amiss, instead of the lack of purchases, but unfortunately, the house had always smelled of rot. That was actually my first memory of the house. The smell. It would seep up from the basement, through the floorboards and vents, an ever-present smell of decay and shit. The basement had always been off limits to me. I remember when we first moved in and she immediately installed a deadbolt on the old wooden door, one with a heavy metal knob. It was just out of reach for my 5-year-old arms, no matter how much I stretched or stood on my toes. I was told never to go into the basement. It was off limits. And I nodded like I always did when adults spoke in that serious tone. But I didn't understand the don't go in the basement rule. I wasn't afraid of basements, and in the last home we had before Daddy left, I was always allowed to play down there. We had been in the house for a month when I finally got up the courage to make my move. I was going to show Mom there was nothing to be afraid of in the basement, and she didn't have to cry at night anymore. It could be like it was before we moved into this stinky house. We could build forts, have camp-out nights together, sing songs, and have dance parties. She caught me red-handed, standing on the wobbly kitchen stool, just as I had managed to unlock the deadbolt. Click! She lunged across the room, screaming at me to get away from the door with madness in her eyes. But I wasn't quick enough, and she threw her body against the wooden door. The stool and I went flying. I landed headfirst onto the hardwood floor, slicing my forehead open. I still have a small scar to this day. A constant reminder that nothing was ever going to be like before. That was the first and only time I ever tried to open the door to the basement. It took me years of therapy and 5 therapists to move past this house, to let go of the resentment, to forgive what she could not and what she could not change. She had pushed me away years before. She kicked me out with her collections and clutter. She was consumed with consumption, her need to keep acquiring outweighing her need to mother. Standing outside the back door, I thought I had braced myself for the worst. I thought I knew what to expect, what it would be like. I wasn't. No amount of preparation could have prepared me for what the house had become. A small, black concrete deck was crumbling, littered in open bags of cat food and animal feces. Around the door, holes had been eaten clear through into the house by rodents, leaving perfect little doors for insects to pour into. The smell of decomposition was overwhelming, and my eyes began to burn and tear up. I mentally kicked myself for not buying a full-face respirator through Amazon Prime before I had left. Instead, all I had was a drugstore face mask I purchased on my way over from the funeral. I walked in and immediately realized nothing was salvageable. The house was full, floor to ceiling, with boxes and piles of garbage that took up every piece of space, sucking up every bit of air. Photos that were once hung with pride were left to decompose from the damp on the walls. Roach carcasses and what seemed to be endless spider webs filled in the corners like a monstrous haunted house. The only walkable path was from the back door to her chair to the basement door, but even those were piled almost knee-deep with debris, with one exception. The path around the basement door was clear, a perfectly clean space, just big enough to allow the door to be opened without issue. I had unlatched the deadbolt, reaching for the handle before I realized this is why I came back to the house, pulled by years of curiosity and an intense need to understand my mother even a little bit, to peek inside her broken mind. All I had to do was look. The door swung open, creaking like an old tomb, and I descended the wooden steps into the depths. I grabbed my cell, turning on the flashlight as the small, incandescent light bulb at the top of the stairs barely pierced the darkness. I don't know what I was expecting, but my heart sank when I reached the bottom step. The basement was much like upstairs, but it was so much worse. Rotting boxes of clothes and broken furniture, molding newspapers, and actual garbage was heaped throughout, festering in a pool of decomposing sludge. A small path had been left, a macabre labyrinth of decay leading me onward. I tried not to think about what I was wading through, ignoring the smell of fresh sewage as my funeral flat sunk down into the ankle-deep, cold, wet basement swamp. Ugh. I walked further than I expected to, the path leading me to a gap between old cement blocks in the foundation, a tunnel that didn't belong beneath an old 1930s bungalow. But I continued on, curiosity moving me forward deeper into the darkness. Soon the path opened up into a large cavern. The smell was even worse than before, and I tried not to gag as I scanned my surroundings. It was cold and damp and dark. The only perceivable light was from my cell, and I clung to it praying that the battery didn't die. The walls of the cavern were heaped with what I looked like wet feces from a large animal, and there were mounds of rotting fur and bones clumped together like giant owl pellets. It was in this cesspool of sewage and bones I saw it. A grotesque figure rose up from its throne of refuge, standing 7 feet tall on thick, hooved legs, its massive thighs supporting the heavy bulk of its bulbous frame. It was monstrous, with an immense belly, strong, muscular arms, and claw-like hands. The beast stepped towards me, the light of my cell phone illuminating each pus-filled boil on its molten red skin. I watched, too frightened to move as its large black eyes took me in. Its wide, frog-like mouth curved into a maniacal smile, filled with sharp, pointed teeth. "So, you are the daughter." Its voice surprisingly deep and soft, like cool 90s jazz DJ. I turned to flee, but I lost my footing and stumbled in a pile of shit and bones. The beast lunged towards me. I dug my hands into the pile, pulling with every bit of strength I had until it gave way and tumbled to the ground, blocking the path behind me. I ran. I didn't have time to look behind me or think, only run. I jumped through the cavern entrance into the basement. I could hear his laughter behind me, getting closer as he easily navigated the horde of garbage and decay. Its breath was hot on my neck. The stench of decay was overwhelming, and my lungs burned with effort as I finally made it to the steps. I leaped, taking them 2 at a time. I'm not going to make it, I think, as I race up the rotting stairs, the beast on my heels. I jumped the last 2 steps to the main floor. A sickening scream and the sound of splintering wood startle me, and I spin around, grabbing the door tightly. Below me, I saw the beast. Its massive weight had broken through the 8th step, only 5 steps shy of the top. The rotten slats had pierced its left side, pinning it within the stairs. Its paper-thin skin torn open. Black blood oozed from the wounds in a steady stream dripping into the basement beneath. It bellowed in pain, struggling to free itself but unable to get a footing, clawing at the last step for leverage, just inches away from me. I slammed the door and turned the deadbolt until I heard the loud click. I ran towards my mother's death chair, climbing over the fallen boxes and torn through her pile of bottles, looking for the ever-present vodka bottle, hoping she still had that same crutch after all these years. She did not disappoint. As quickly as I could, I poured the clear liquid on her chair of decay, splashing it on her stacks of old magazines and newspapers, her knick-knack collection of frickin' little wooden dolls, and the pile of shit-stained clothes along the countertops full of dried used tea bags and takeaway containers. And finally I threw it at the basement door. I screamed as it shattered, sending glass shards and liquid fuel throughout. I turned around to give my childhood home one last look and lit a match. I should have listened to her all those years ago when she told me never to go into the basement. My mother lived with her demons, feeding it meals of garbage, feral cats, and bits of her sanity. I only hope the fire kills it. So quoth this raven. My darlings, this apparently has been in my subreddit for a while, and I missed it. My sincerest apologies to the author. I hope this is okay. It's a good story. Good story. If you were expecting the campground series today, I am moving it to Saturdays. So I will have a nice long episode on Saturday with 2 or 3 chapters. I hope you enjoy them. And thank you for coming, my darlings. I hope you enjoyed this. It means a lot to me when you come to listen to my stories. And special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Ermin, Darren and Jennifer, Laura, Mutant Artificial Intelligence, Tabby Cat, and special thanks to Charlotte Emerson and Cortez Williams.